Good afternoon and welcome to SportWorks Talks. My name's Christian Page, and with me this afternoon is Hugh and Nickel. How are you guys?
Fine, thank you very much.
Very good. And in what is a very cool afternoon in Switzerland and in Lausanne, we're just talking about the weather, and I know that's kind of a boring topic, but honestly, the temperature has dropped, and we're being very COVID compliant and keeping all the windows open. So, when it's sub 10 degrees, it is a bit chilly. I don't know how it is in your guys' office today.
It's going to be a long month of November for you, you know.
It is. We're coming in with more coats and more coats every time. So great to have you both with us this afternoon, and great for you, of those of you who are joining us online from around the different parts of the world. I want to say welcome to you. As always, please, if you can, just drop us a note in the chat. Let us know where you're from, just so we know where you're joining from, and maybe how warm it is, just to help us here in Lausanne. This afternoon, great topic. Really, I think, having been through the startup process myself a number of times, it would have been great to have had some of the information which is going to be shared this afternoon through some of my earlier journeys. I think you'll find it really useful and some really great information here that Nicolas and Hugh will share with us. So, as always, SportWorks Talks, we will do about a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions as we're going through the presentation, please just drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. And I'll probably pop in with some questions as we go through the presentation as well. So over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure being with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for this invitation, this opportunity to speak about how to structure a business. I think that wondering how to structure a business is one of the toughest questions an entrepreneur may have, as it is a permanent question you have to think about and consider. It requires, in particular, to anticipate every step of your evolution and of your business, and also the potential problems that may arise with your developments. It also requires to understand your own business and your added value. We often have people asking for advice that do not exactly know where they are standing in the market. So wondering what is your difference compared to your competitors, compared to what is offered to the market, is one of the most important things that you have to consider. It also requires to have a general understanding of the legal framework. It's not always very easy to have a general understanding of the legal framework, because your business evolves and there are different changes, either in the rules and regulations that apply, either in the way you structure your own business. And what you have to understand is that maybe twiggling something may trigger a different application, different rules and regulation, such as under a tax perspective, such as under competition laws, or different rules and regulations. Being an entrepreneur and structuring a business also means being responsive and creative to adapt your business. I think it's important to say that it's a hard task. Developing a business is not always easy. You have your ups and downs, but you must never forget that you have to believe in your project if you want to make it through. And you also always have to accept the changes, and that you also have to understand that adapting and changing is good. I think that the person, the entrepreneur or the founder that remains too focused on his business and that's not able to consider what the market really needs is someone that may be going in the wrong direction. And sometimes you just need a slight adaptation to really dig in the market and really get into it. And last but not least, and this is certainly something you already know, is that structuring your business requires you to know your long-term strategy. Where are you going? Where are you standing today? And where do you want to stand tomorrow? And always be 2 steps ahead. You mustn't be 1 step ahead, but 2 steps ahead, already knowing, not always disclose your strategy, but just knowing where you're wanting to go and your final aim. I think that is really something you have to bear in mind. I've tried to represent in this graphic 2 arrows. Basically, the vertical arrow is your business developments that can go sky high, and on the horizontal arrow, it's your life cycle stage. What you have to understand is that your needs during each phase and during each step will definitely change and evolve. For example, if you're in the idea stage, you're basically thinking about working on an idea or concept, setting up your business plan, finding the right team. People will come and go. Think about your IP. What IP do you need to develop your business? What IP do you have to protect if you're in a scale up phase? And we'll come to that later. And determine your structure. And then you move on. Next step is you'll be at a co-founder stage. So this means your idea now is settled, is determined. You have the right team, a core team, and then you have to wonder, what kind of structure do I need? And depending on liability questions, depending on rules and regulations, depending on your IP, how do you want to protect it? And I know Hugh is going to speak about it. And then you'll come in this beautiful curve, which is the scale up, which means that you're doing your business, you're on the market, you're contracting with clients, you have money inflowing, you're getting all attention. So then you got investors that are interested in investing in your company. You got maybe investment rounds, and then you're thinking about the exits. The exit is selling part of your business, selling the shares of your company, and just enjoying your lifetime, and maybe starting a new business and a new company. Obviously, during all these different steps, they'll have issues arising. I mean, the more we usually say the more the merrier, but I think we also have to know that the more problems you will also have, and that you have to think about that either in different agreements, either in structuring your business, and always think about how you can make things better, especially thinking about the bad weather when the sun is shining. And you also have different issues, for example, with your business valuation, with the conflicts between the different interests. If you have investors coming in, and we'll be speaking swiftly about financing your business, obviously you won't have necessarily the same interest as the founders, and you have to settle the correct rights and obligations in documents and ensure everything is perfect. We usually like to say and tell our clients that it's always very important to keep things clean in your company. Sometimes we underestimate this, but if you just think that you're an investor and you want to invest in a company, if you come into a data room, and everything is very clear and very cleaned up, I think the first impression is very important, and it has a great effect on the final decision. I'm thinking about one of these cases where I had this great company, a great startup, scale up was beautiful, and we had the investors, but they arrived in this data room and everything was so confusing and so messy that at the end of the day, they're saying, okay, if the business is run in the same way the data room is held, I mean, there's a big issue. And finally, they did not invest. So whatever step you are in, just bear in mind that keeping things clean and tidy, if you one day want investors to come in, is something that creates great value and that does not take much. Now, when you structure a business, you got all these typical questions that arise. For example, how to protect my idea. So under a Swiss law perspective, what you have to know is that ideas cannot be protected. Ideas is just a general concept. And to explain this, just imagine being in a room with 10 different people and we're all speaking about the same idea, and we decide that everybody goes on his own aside for let's say 5 minutes and comes back on how he's going to implement the idea. You quickly realize that you have 10 different results. So basically, you won't protect an idea, you're going to protect the implementation of the idea. So people often want to use like NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to protect idea, but what's fundamentally the purpose of it? I think the first thing we have to bear in mind is that the NDA is not the best tool for everything. You can sign the best NDA in the world. As soon as you're going to disclose information, there's going to be some kind of leakage, and you won't be able to come back on what has been disclosed. So even though you're signing an NDA, it's not necessarily going to protect you or even protect your trade secrets. So the best way fundamentally to protect your business is not by signing an NDA, but it's just by controlling the information which is disclosed. Another issues we have with NDAs, it's depending on with who you're dealing. Some people are very sophisticated in some certain markets, or we go in depth and are targeting some same kind of companies, and they would definitely not want to sign the NDA knowing that there are investors in that segment, and knowing that what potentially they might hear on the left side may be something that is used on the right side. So they won't want to sign those documents. We also have NDAs. This is something that is more and more common, that provides also for non-competition and non-solicitation. I also think it's a great mistake depending at which phase you are, because it may trigger competition issues because you're going to restrict competition. So when you are disclosing information to a third party, I think the only important point you have to remember is what information am I disclosing, and bearing in mind that an NDA will not protect you anyhow, even if there's any breach. And then there's another question that often comes, is how to protect my intellectual property, my IP. So I'm not going to go in depth in this point because Hugh is going to develop later on, but I think thinking about what kind of structure is required also means thinking about how do I want to protect my IP. Is my IP going to be protected for my own? Am I going to protect and register the IP under my own name? Is it going to be in a company? Who is going to contract with the different investors? Is it myself that's going to be personally liable, or should I create a specific structure? So determining the different structure for your business. Do you want it under LTD, LLC? Is it just going to be a contractual agreement like a joint venture? It requires to really know how you want to structure your business at a later stage. And finally, I mean, we're speaking about these different stages, and as soon as many people are involved, I think it's very important to directly have a contractual mechanism that provides for specific rules in case of any deadlock. I was saying the more the merrier, but the more problems too. So if you can already have all the right mechanisms that are set out when everything is going well and everything is bright, I think it can avoid very bad and dirty situations. What are the costs? We were speaking earlier with Christian about different costs, taking into consideration the Swiss market in which we work, and different companies and different markets where other companies and other startups are structured. I think there's a first distinction to be made is what is the market and what is your business? If you're under a product perspective, it means what are the costs of production and how must your business be structured? You got different ways to structure business, but we'll be speaking about these different agreements in later scale up agreements. And then if you're under a service agreement, is what are the human costs? What are the wages I have to bear? So answering the question, what are the costs? I mean, we can speak about the cost of implementing a structured company, but there's no fundamental answer to this because you have to determine the cost in your business plan depending on your markets and on your business. So speaking about this brings us to the question, how can I finance my business? There are different ways, traditional ways, because there are many other ways to finance one's business. Traditional ways, equity. It means going and pitching investors, offering equity against some money. That is very easy. I mean, you go out there, you give a valuation to your company, and you must just go and beat them and get the money in. Otherwise, there's a different way, traditional way is going to ask for a loan. If you're at an early stage company, being granted a loan is a bit more complicated because they want some securities and they may want the founders to be also personally liable if you have a special structure that has been created. And then you got these different mechanisms that allow you to have immediate money in the companies, because we know that it takes money to make money, and that does provide for special mechanism that you can convert, for example, the amount that has been borrowed into equity at a later stage, but obviously depending with who you have in front of you and who is the investor. You have to pay interest and all of that. I think it's very important to bear in mind that all the money coming from a third party that does not belong necessarily to your structure will have to be reimbursed. And there is this great tendency sometimes, to asking great amounts and not being able at the end of the day to reimburse them. And then the alternatives such as crowdfunding, going to see for grants and subsidies and different ways to structure and getting financing.
Great. Okay, so I'll take over from here with a few short slides on how to grow smoothly. So first of all, what I'd like to say is that also I would like to say how happy I am to be here. I think it's a great opportunity. Nicholas and I really enjoy the whole SportWorks community. We believe it's doing really great work. We really believe that it's a really strong community, inspiring actually. So really good to be here. Now, when we talk about growth, first of all, we need to have a tiny bit of an understanding what we're talking about. Some startups do not want to grow. Some people are quite happy just launching their company, working with 2 or 3 other people and staying that way. We can take the example of, lawyers. A lawyer could just simply say, I don't want to work for a big multinational company anymore. I want to set up my own shop on the street corner opposite the Starbucks and just have my own little firm. And these people do not want to grow, really. However, if you do intend to have a scale up, which is what we're talking about today, so a startup that is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, then you do need to have basically this form of ambition and also some understandings of what type of risk you're going to be exposed to. And I don't really like talking about risk because I think it's a world of opportunities out there, but you do need to have a tiny bit of information. So information is power. And right now, with these few slides, we're going to try and just look at the surface of it, of what are a few sort of key points. So here, I understand there's a bit of text. We're not going to go into the details, but I just wanted to highlight some points. So when you're looking to grow, you need to understand that you need solid foundations. And as Nicholas just said, you need to have basically what we can call a clean and tidy business. You need to make sure that things are pretty clean, pretty tidy, that you got the proper documentation in place, that you've done the regulatory checks if you're doing a regulated activity, which is not always the case in the sports industry, actually. We can typically think of, the biotech, pharma, that kind of stuff. That's a typical example. But you never know. Some stuff is regulated. If you're doing some types of cosmetic products or whatever, it's pretty quickly regulated. So you need to understand that maybe you have regulatory exposure, that you're going to be needing some types of contracts that will need to be solid, protect your company and not protect the counterparty too much. You need to also have an understanding of what fiscal tax situation you're walking into. That makes a huge difference at the end of the day. And it's evolving very quickly as well. As soon as you scale internationally, typically VAT is pretty quickly a problem, as I've learned from some of my VAT colleagues recently. It's something to really always keep in mind. And again, also, this is something I'm going to be talking about in a minute, having a good-looking IP portfolio. So these things are necessary to the extent that you don't want to be scaring investors away. You don't want potential investors to look at your company and to think, wow, this is really not clean. It's not looking good, and I don't want to put my money into it. You don't want that happening. In the same way, you do not want a regulator to come knocking on your door saying, you forgot to file Form 123 ABC. These things happen every day, and you do not want to be the target of that kind of stuff. It's a real headache. It leads to high legal fees. It leads to really slowing down the growth of your company. So you just need a tiny bit of basic understanding. And here, again, bottom line is clean and tidy, but a little goes a long way. It doesn't need to be perfect. Far from there. You sort of need to choose what you're going to go after. But a little bit of diligence in the beginning is going to be very helpful. So intellectual property, this is what we call IP right now. Intellectual property could be anything from know-how to patents to trademarks to also trade secrets. And this is, whether you know it or not, at the core of your business. We often talk about 80% of a company's value is IP, and from what I see, this number is really the case, and even more so for startups. The real thing that you have is not what you have in the warehouse. It's the technology, it's the brand, it's your reputation, it's your image, and that's intellectual property. So you need to treat it with a huge amount of care and a huge amount of love, actually. You need to love your intellectual property and really treat it well. And you need to protect it aggressively, like a jealous boyfriend or something. You need to treat it really with a lot of care, but also with a bit of aggressivity against third-party infringers. And that's a lot of work, and it's something that I really do encourage you to keep in mind, because that's the value of your company. So then again, I put some other elements here which are important early on. So do not postpone regulatory analysis and data protection analysis, because these can just simply lead to big fines. Even if you're a startup, you can have regulatory problems if you didn't do a proper data protection analysis in the beginning. It's sad, but it is true. So data protection is a big thing. Regulatory, if you're in a regulated area, is a big topic. And then, of course, you're going to be having contracts. You're going to be entering into various agreements with lots of people. And you need to have a good lawyer help you draft contract templates, or at least review your contract templates. This is going to save you a lot of pain later down the road. And you should do this only for the contracts that you're going to be doing frequently, everyday contracts, and for the contracts that relate to big deals. So if you're going to enter into a multinational deal with Nestle, you need to get your lawyers on board. Otherwise, you're just going to lose out on potential revenue and have a higher legal risk. Agreements, of course, in English is much better. It's much better to have them in English, simply because investors like it. It travels better, and investors will be happy to have your contract templates drafted in English. Yeah, and then again, the tax treatment. This is where you save money. So this is the last slide for this chapter. Costs are always a concern, obviously, and for us lawyers, costs are a concern too. We don't want to be a financial burden. We want to be enhancing our client's business. So you need to understand that when you are going to grow, a lot of money is going to be spent. More money goes out than comes in, probably. A lot of money goes to marketing budget. Sometimes we talk about 70% of the investments going into marketing. Maybe creating an international branch if you want to be closer to, for instance, the US market or the Japanese or Chinese market. You might need to sacrifice some revenue in order to do market entry pricing. Research and development costs a fortune, and legal fees can be pretty expensive. So you need some sort of conviction that the end result is going to be worth it. You need some drive. What I'd like to add before I finish this chapter, legal fees. There's a bit of prejudice around the legal profession. People are a bit afraid of approaching lawyers. They're a bit afraid of having to pay a huge amount for some type of work that they don't really fully understand. And it's a concern that we share as lawyers too. So one word of advice is, when you're looking for a lawyer, doesn't need to be a big firm lawyer or a small firm lawyer, but you need to just find someone who has the skills, has the necessary knowledge and experience to deal with what you need. And then you just need to sort of go with your gut instinct and choose a lawyer that you like, because we often see people who choose a lawyer that they don't like because they think that this is going to be good for them. They say, I'm going to take the meanest, most aggressive lawyer on the block because he's going to frighten everybody and I'm going to win everything. It sounds a bit simplified, but it's often the case. So just go with someone that you like, someone you could have a beer with at the end of the day, because it's a trust-based relationship. It really is. And choose the best lawyer you can find and ask him to do as little work as possible. And so that's my advice for the way forward when you're working with lawyers. I think this wraps it up for this chapter, Nicholas. I think it's over to you again. Yeah.
Now let's quickly discuss doing business on the internet. I think that internet is the window to the world and is something that allows you or a business to scale up pretty easily and with not too many costs. Internet is the easiest way to scale up a business, either by just having an internet site, having a platform you're developing. What you have to understand in this slide is that there's no one-size-fits-all principle when you are on the internet. Each business has to be considered on its own, and you have to have general terms and conditions which are tailor-made to your own business. Because finally, doing business on the internet means mass contracting. So you straight want to have your own rules that are going to be applicable, such as which is going to be the applicable law, which jurisdiction in case of any conflict, how do you see things in case you want to amend your general terms and conditions, because you know that a business is going to change throughout the years and you have to adapt to the novelties. Exclude, for example, your liability is also a great question. So you would want to have all these very important points provided in your general terms and condition. What you have to understand is, as from the moment you are mass contracting, you want your general terms and condition to be considered as a contractual relationship. So how do you do that? Under a Swiss perspective, you have to integrate the general terms and condition. You often do it without realizing. You know, when you download an app or you go on an internet site, you often have to like tick the box saying, I've read and I agree on the general terms and condition. That is typically the integration of the general terms and condition in your relationship with your customer. So it's very important to have a process whereby your general terms and conditions are integrated in your relationship with your customer. Doing business on the internet also requires to ensure compliance with the different rules and regulations. I was saying just before that there's no one-size-fits-all principle that is applicable. I can take this very simple example under anti-money laundering perspective. For example, if you have money going through your own accounts, you have to be sure that the rules under anti-money laundering perspective are not applicable, because if it is the case, you may have problems. If you have money deposited, for example, on your bank accounts, you have to wonder, depending where your business is and in which country you are, if there are not specific rules and regulations with respect to money deposit, and maybe under a banking law perspective that may be triggered and become applicable. And here we're speaking about the data protection rules and regulations and the GDPR and so on. I think it's very important to master all these different rules and regulations, I was saying in the beginning, and being at least 2 steps ahead, avoiding yourself finding, realizing that you're in this situation, that you're running after potential regulatory amendments that will be soon in force. Making business on the internet also means that you have to protect as much as possible your IP before going on the internet, or disclose as little information. For example, when we have sometimes clients, they compare but their business to other business, so we are the first as lawyers sort of to go in and check out how competitors do things, how it's structured, and sometimes by just reading the general terms and conditions, they're giving us all the key to their business. So I think when you're doing business on the internet, you first of all have to ensure that your IP is correctly protected, and then that no trade secret may be disclosed. For example, by structuring your business in such a way, or by giving only very little information at the first stage, and depending on the whole process, sending more and more information to your customers to avoid that anybody just coming on your internet site or platform has all the keys to your business. Hugh.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I'll take over, but this is going to be very fast because we reached the time. So, and we really want to keep some time for the Q&A. So basically, and this is, once you reach a big stage, once you want to go internationally, it's obviously a great moment. So you're going to pop the champagne and treat yourself. And then you need to sort of think about how you're going to expand. And what you do need, the bottom line is, you need some form of physical presence. It could be a company in every country in any market that interests you, but it could also be getting a third party to do this work for you. So you hire another company to develop another market for you. Typically, I create a company in Switzerland, works well, and I want to go to Japan where I don't speak the language, I don't know the customs, I don't know the authorities. So what I'm going to do is hire another company in Japan to develop that market for me. this is a great way of doing it contractually instead of doing it through actual local presence through a new entity that belongs to you. And bottom line is, you have 3 different contracts that often come into play. It's not the only ones, but often you're going to see this. You're going to see the license agreement, where you allow someone else to use your intellectual property for a specific purpose, and you get paid, obviously. Distribution agreements, where you get someone to, it goes further. Distribution agreement, someone is selling your products on a specified market, geographical market, for instance, Japan, and in exchange, pays you some form of revenue. This person could have exclusivity for the market, could be the only one developing the market, or not have exclusivity. This is totally up to you. And then the last one, which I mentioned here just as an example as well, is a franchise agreement. So franchise agreements are hard to define. They include a transfer of know-how. You'd let someone use your know-how, and also transfer of IP under a license. It's a bit of a hybrid type of agreement, very complex, so it's fun for us lawyers, it's less fun for the other people. But these are type of agreements that you'll often be seeing. And again, this is once a company is really big and is really ready to expand internationally. And you need to have already a certain level of fame, a good brand, a solid brand, and people need to already know you quite well locally. So yeah, and then I'll wrap it up. It's a defining moment, as I said. When you're using these agreements, it means that you're doing good business already. It has been working, so it's a sort of reward that you can already get there. You need to sort of be careful though, because the choices you make, you often cannot go back. So if you give perpetual exclusive license to someone to use your technology, you cannot take it back. It's very hard to terminate that type of agreement and to say, actually, I want to do it myself. So at that point in time, once you want to go international, once you want to reach a lot of markets, that's where you really need to sit down and think about your strategy internationally. And again, it's a fun moment. It's really a fun moment. Good. So we maybe have a few quick final remarks, Nicolas, and then I think we should move on to the questions pretty quickly because we've overstayed over.
Yeah, sorry about this. So I'll be very quick. Final remarks. Being an entrepreneur requires having the right mindset. You'll be going through ups and downs. Do never forget to believe in yourself. Sometimes things take a bit more time than planned, which is pretty usual, but just keep it up, keep on going, believe in yourself, believe in your business, because it'll just happen. And if you don't believe in yourself, nobody will. So stay positive. You know, sometimes it is very difficult, but just stay positive and hang in there. Making mistakes is also part of the apprenticeship. I think there's no right or wrong decision. Sometimes, you know, you'll take the wrong decision, but if you didn't make that decision, it wouldn't bring you where you are actually now. So just keep that positive mindset and just accept that making decision is part of the game. And finally, scaling up a business requires a long-term vision and understanding of your business. I think this is the central point of how you really want to scale up, is always being able at the right moment to say, what are my needs, where am I going, and never losing the focus on where you're going. Believe in yourselves. Us lawyers, we're always believing in you. We have trust and we trust you. And if nobody gets out there and do things, we'll just stay where we'll still be hundreds of years behind if nobody had that confidence in themselves and in the business. So keep it up, guys, and we are always happy to be on your side.
Great stuff, guys. Sorry, let me flick on my video. What great information. As we said at the outset, and I think for those of you who are with us, we had a good conversation earlier, and it was saying, gosh, I wish I'd had a lot of this information when I was starting out many years ago with some of my entrepreneurial aspirations. Just some good basic information and some tips there. So really appreciate what you've been able to share. So thank you both for that. Some interesting ones though. It was one key point you raised, and it's something that I really quite aligned with it, and about becoming aware, is that statistic about IP being representing, you know, that core of a business and representing up to 80% of its value. And I think for people who work in the sport business, and certainly there's so many different aspects of business startups in sport. understanding that IP value is really key. And it's one of the great takeaways. So thank you for making me aware of that one as well. There's a great question here from Michelle. So how do you price the value of IP and know-how? So nice segue into that question.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. In particular, it's good because I don't have a clear answer. And the truth is no one really does have a clear answer. The different ways of determining the value of IP, income method, so how much is the IP bringing into your company through licenses, for instance, that allows you to do a projection and determine the value of your IP through its income. The cost method, which is how much did it cost you to develop the IP? Mm-hmm. This is maybe the closest one to be able to answer the question of how much is our know-how worth? The question would be, well, how much did you spend to develop it? If it's something that you did on a napkin quickly, then the cost method is not going to work because you're a genius and the cost doesn't really associate to that. But if, on the other hand, it was a lot of reading, a lot of investment, a lot of people working on it, then the cost method is pretty reliable. A third method, for instance, would be the market method, which is how much is the market ready to pay for it? And this is something that we see as lawyers indirectly when our clients maybe go public or when they find investors. People say, we will buy 60% of your company through its shares, and for that we're giving you $5 million. That gives quite a precise idea, again, assuming that IP is the core element of the company. And this is really true, this 80% rule. When you think of companies that traditionally do not seem IP-centric, they actually are. If you think of Mercedes-Benz, people say they make cars. No, what they actually do is file patents. And if you think of, in the sports world, very famous athletes, Lionel Messi, Roger Federer, you can put their name in IP search tools and they'll have loads of trademarks in their name. And once they retire, they're going to be getting money through their branding. That's where the value comes from. And I actually believe many of these athletes get a lot of money through branding more than through the actual practice of their craft. So yeah, I hope I managed to answer a tiny bit the questions there. It's a tricky one, but I hope I gave some elements.
No, I think you gave great insight. The point about brand, and again, I think that's one of the notes I made here is about the trademark and the value of your brand. And I think that's, again, a key to sport because so much about the sport business is around building a brand, whether you be an athlete as your own personal brand or your product or service. So it's linked very heavily to the sponsorship. So like I say, great insight that. So thank you. Another question here from Joanne. Thanks, Joanne. It's how was the current COVID situation affected your clients' growth? What trends are you seeing in funding approaches for support and funding from banks and the government? Good question. Thanks, Joanne.
This is also a tricky question. In fact, the government now, the Swiss government has subsidies and are giving some loans, in fact, that have to be reimbursed. So I think the first point is also for a startup or a business which is in development to really know how much they need, because one day this loan has to be reimbursed. Now, under an investment perspective, we did see a little slowdown happening because also, I mean, people are going to give a value to a company depending on its how can I say it's on different fonds de roulement. I don't know how we say it exactly in English, but on basically the money that has in its accounts and how much it needs really to go on. So a lot of investors are also like sort of waiting to maybe have better opportunities to invest if the company is in a more complicated situation. Mm-hmm. But I still believe there's still this very positive, once again in the Swiss field, the very positive effect that things are still going on, and the Swiss state is really doing all that is possible to avoid all the bankruptcies, insolvencies, and so on. So I think there are great projects that are here, many helps that are here too, but under a purely investment perspective, there's a little slowdown, but I think there are many opportunities, so we still see a lot of business that is going on and a lot of things happening, so you mustn't worry too much about it.
So I guess a follow-up question to that may be, you mentioned the importance of understanding selling on the internet. Have you seen much change or growth in the need to have better online agreements? Has that changed much?
Yeah. As lawyers, we always think it's very important to have good online agreements. So that need, in my view, hasn't changed. Our clients, however, have been asking for that because, well, and this is also related to Joanne's question here, our clients have been sort of slowing down the launch of some of their products, but spending more time on the research and development of it.
Okay.
And that also means that they've been trying new avenues, such as the internet, new sales channels, to try and get their products onto the market. Oftentimes, they do not really want to complicate that, quote unquote, with legal paperwork. Sometimes it's a good idea because it's just a temporary quick fix type of deal. But other times, I do think it's a good opportunity to actually get a properly functioning web delivery model going.
Okay. I guess that plays into one of your first points, which is keep everything clean and tidy, about having these good agreements in place, and having good contracts in place, and keeping the house in order is quite key.
And Christian, to illustrate that, because I think it's a really good point. As lawyers, we're often hired to do a due diligence, so basically to audit companies, often startups. And as I said, it's never perfect, and companies would be wrong to aim for perfect. But we see really quickly when it's good. Okay. It just takes 20 minutes scrolling through the documentation to see if it's going to be a long night or if it's going to be dealt with pretty quickly. And I think that's a good illustration. We as lawyers see it very easily. And so again, that's why we talk so often about the clean and tidy type of approach. We can see when it's clean and tidy. We're always going to find some problems. That's our job, but we see pretty quickly when it's good.
And as you say, that the benefit of that, we talked earlier, it's like the challenges of a startup. We talk about prioritization, and quite often the legal piece is, yes, it's got to be done. It often has the perception of being, overly expensive. It could be costly. Where do I spend my money? But I completely align and agree with the concept of keeping everything clean and tidy and orderly, especially if you're going to be looking for investment. I know from other organizations I've worked with, that investment and seeking investment, if you do have a neat and tidy house, it does make it so much easier. And as you highlighted, quite often any investor is going to do the due diligence, and they're going to first bring the people they're going to bring in is the lawyers who are going to be able to do that quick check and see whether things are in order. So it is. There's a lot of value in that. I guess this is probably what I'm trying to say. I think it's really important with what I'm interpreting too.
And one point with that, if I may add, is what is interesting is packaging. And that's what Nicolas was saying in the beginning with IP too. The packaging is nearly everything. The idea doesn't really matter. Everybody has good ideas. Even lawyers have good ideas sometimes. Everybody has good ideas.
No question.
But it's really about how you actually present that to the outside world. And we've seen bad concepts bring in a lot of investor money just because they made it look really super fancy and flashy.
That's great. So look, we're just about on time. I've got one more question for you both. You both work in startups. You both work in sport. Why?
I think it's the best sector. I mean, you always have fun. You're always discovering new stuff, and you basically always complex because you got these great people with their great ideas and are going for it. So you always have this feeling that you on their side and not in the driver's seat, I would say. But it's very fun. Looking at these people and saying potentially this person is going to change the world. So I really get a kick out of that and see all the things happening. And I think too, you constantly in the change. When you're working in the startup sector and in the sports sector, things are continuously changing, and you always have to stay updated on what's happening. And you got all the different aspects. When you're working with some very well-established company, things are very clean. We have to work with the legal department. Things are sort of too smooth, too not rock and roll enough.
Yeah. Excellent. And you?
Well, it really is the same because it's always very dynamic. The clients really inspire us, and I'm very interested in technology, so I do the technology side of things, the legal technology, and it's just fascinating to be able to see in the outside world what is going on. I find that really stimulating, really fun, really inspiring and humbling, and that's the reason why we like going to work in the morning. You know, it's very inspiring, really fun.
Great stuff. Well, yeah, I completely align with both of that. This is why I've been doing it for a while, and I really enjoy our sector. So, look, thank you both. Great information, really important information for anyone in a startup or in an organization of any size. These are really key pieces. So I just want to say thank you both for your time today to share these insights. I've just saw there's another question has popped in. I have a question about choosing the right business format. Look, this might be something we can follow up in the forum, and certainly Nicolas and Hugh will be able to answer that for you, Jacob. I'm just conscious of time, so we're going to have to wrap up there for today. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
It's a real pleasure, and thank you to all the guests too. I mean, people from all over the world, so that was really fabulous. Great pleasure.
Excellent. And yes, absolutely. Thank you to all our online guests who joined us and are participating today. Thank you for being with us. It's been another great SportWorks talk. I wish you a great afternoon wherever you are. Hopefully it's warmer than here in Lausanne. And we wish you a safe day. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.